Hey everyone, my name's Sam. I'm the CEO of VegCatalyst. We're working on a vegan artificial intelligence marketing assistant, and I'm here today to talk to you about the future of vegan advocacy and harnessing the power of AI to help animals. So, to give you a little bit of background on my story and what led me towards thinking that AI is one of the most impactful ways we can make a difference for animals. So, to start, we got to go way back to the start of my vegan journey. When I was maybe 11, 12 years old, I read a book about what happened to animals in factory farms, and I knew that something needed to change. So I was always involved in activism, but that activism didn't always have a strategy around it. So when I first went vegan, I was kind of mad at the world. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that, your angry vegan phase when you first go vegan. And so my communication wasn't super effective, as you can probably imagine. So then the next thing I started to realize is I needed a strategy here. So at first, I based that strategy on assumptions about what I thought would work. So I started thinking like, how are these messages going to be received? But it was really just based on assumptions. Still, this was a little bit more effective at least than not having any strategy at all. The next step after this was to base that strategy on broad evidence. So I started to realize that I didn't have to take these stabs in the dark about what kind of communication would be effective or not. There were already people like marketers and social scientists who had been researching effective communication for a long time. So I started to look at what the evidence there said and change my approach as a result. So eventually this led me to this job where I worked with Vegan Outreach, handing out leaflets to university students about veganism. So Vegan Outreach was very much an evidence-focused organization, and we incorporated a lot of that into our outreach. Following this, I started VegCatalyst, and the first thing we did was create a vegan marketing agency. And this is where the next step came in, the strategy informed by specific evidence. So because we were running marketing campaigns, we could actually specifically test different messages on different groups of people and see how they responded. So as you can see, this is all about basically basing more and more on evidence, less on assumptions, and getting really specific with that evidence as well. The next step in this process is artificial intelligence. Now, the reason artificial intelligence can do a much better job at this than humans is because computers can read a lot more data than any human can. So an artificial intelligence can look at something like 13,000 different scientific studies and just sheer amounts of information that no human could process. And you can then inform your strategy based around that. So here's a few concrete examples of how AI can help animal activists. The first way it can help is by saving emotional labor. So I'm sure all of us here have probably had points where we've been maybe debating about veganism on Facebook or something like that. We've probably also had points where we've let the emotions get the better of us and we haven't been as effective in our communications as we could be. The thing about AI is that it never gets tired, it never gets angry, it never gets overworked. It's always optimizing for whatever goal you optimize it for, which in this case would be communicating effectively about veganism. It also enables us to create content a lot faster. So as we all know, we're moving more and more into a digital world, and a large amount of that is, I think, why we've seen this sort of acceleration of veganism over the last few years with the growth of social networks and things like that. So we know that communicating online is a really important way to get our message across, and with AI we can create that content in far less time and with far fewer resources. It can also help you with personalizing your outreach. So artificial intelligence algorithms can predict the most effective responses for specific audiences. There's a bunch of ways it can do this. One example is that it can read people's social media posts, and it can then analyze what type of personality traits they're likely to have and then craft messages that are going to work based on those personality traits. So that's something that you're probably not going to be able to do as a human, but because AI again is looking at such large amounts of data, it can find patterns across that data that humans would usually miss. And that comes into this final point about gaining deeper insights. So one really good use for AI for vegan activists is to understand the research on effective communication. If you were going to go into all of those studies yourself and try to read the whole thing, it's going to take you a lifetime and you're probably not even going to scratch the surface. But with artificial intelligence, you can summarize those studies into key findings, and then you can even see what the large volume of research says overall, without having to go into everything specifically. For vegan businesses, AI has even more potential. So one way that it can help is by improving your marketing. So one role of AI is that it can make predictions on how well marketing content will perform before it goes live. So at the moment, the way that most businesses do their digital advertising is they just make some assumptions about what they think is going to be the most effective ad, and they run a couple of those in a split test, spend hundreds or thousands of dollars in testing those ads, and then they get to finding out what one was actually best. With AI, you can run these as simulations before spending a cent, which obviously dramatically increases the rate at which you can optimize your advertising. It can also make staff much more efficient. So it can allow the same amount of staff members to create up to 10 times the amount of output. Take copywriting, for example. It's much faster to have the AI, for example, draft up a bunch of content ideas and you just edit them. And it actually increases job satisfaction as well, because it takes out a lot of the worst parts of the job. For example, overcoming writer's block is something that copywriters generally find very frustrating, but AI can overcome that instantly. It can reduce operational costs for vegan businesses too by making the entire business more efficient and not just the staff. So examples of this are applying AI algorithms to look at things like your recipes if you're a food business and find more cost-effective ways to get the results. It can also help with segmenting your audience. So AI is really great at understanding how to deliver very personalized messages on scale. So finally, the ways that it can help the vegan movement. So there are two main ways that I think this is going to really change the game for the animal rights movement over these next coming years. One is by developing better alternatives to animal products. So AI can actually look at the molecular structure of something like an animal protein, for example, and it can figure out which combination of plant proteins is going to replicate that best. So there's already companies that are implementing this, and this is a big part of how we're seeing a lot of these big advances we've had in the quality of things like plant-based meat products over the last couple of years, for example. Another really great use of it is that it can develop better alternatives to animal testing. So AI can run simulations for how new drugs will affect the body and organs within your body without having to test that on animals. So I think that we're going to see more and more of this happening over the next couple of years. So everything that I've just mentioned is what AI can do for vegan businesses, animal activists, and the vegan movement in general today. But what AI can do today and what AI can do tomorrow are two wildly different things. So this graph that I'm showing you here shows the number of scientific publications about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And as you can see, there's a huge exponential growth just over the last couple of years. So not only is AI growing in power, but the rate that it's growing is exponential. This graph here shows the growth of AI computing usage. So prior to about 2015, there's something called Moore's Law in computing, which was the idea that every 2 years on average, the total amount of compute power would double. But we're now seeing that doubling happening every 3 to 4 months since AI started really taking off. So again, not only is this, a very rapid rate of growth, but it's becoming even more rapid every day. And finally, here's an example of the size of the artificial intelligence models that exist and the dates they were released. So again, you can see that same exponential growth curve. What this graph is showing is something called parameters. So a way to think of a parameter in machine learning is it's one element of what the model can do. An example of this might be if you have a bunch of text and you're trying to get the AI to determine, for example, is cow an animal, right? That's one parameter. So now some of these models we have are up to 1.6 trillion parameters. And again, the size of these models is growing year on year. So if all of that kind of just made your eyes glaze over and, didn't make sense, this is a super simple way to put it. This is the human progress we've had up until now, and what we're going to experience in these next couple of years is that basically almost vertical line. But this is not all good news for animals. So The reality is that the most common artificial intelligence models that exist today are basically very speciesist. And the reason for this is the way that they're trained. So the way they train large language models like ChatGPT, for example, which is, in the news a lot now, is they basically scraped the entire internet and they trained on that data, getting the AI to predict what the next word would be in a sequence. So because it's trained on the whole data of the internet, it picks up all the biases of the internet as well. And some of you might have seen conversations around how this affects human biases as well. For example, a lot of image generators tend to over-sexualize women, for example, but there's also a massive impact of speciesism in these systems. So when you look at GPT-3, which is the precursor to ChatGPT, you can see there's a huge difference here between how it describes animals that we consider pets and animals that we consider food. So everything highlighted in red there shows basically represents violence against animals. So it only really talks about that when we're talking about farmed animals. Now, one of the reasons that this is a problem is that ChatGPT is by far the fastest growing application in the entire history of the internet. So when you look at other types of applications, Spotify, for example, took 55 months to hit 100 million users. TikTok, which was previously the fastest growing, took 9 months. ChatGPT only took 2 months to reach 100 million users, and it reached its first million just within a couple of days. So these models are becoming much more commonly used, and they also have this very strong bias against the animals that we're trying to save. So we were trying to think about what's the solution to this, and because the problem was essentially the fact that it was trained on this generic data that was biased, and it was also not being trained by people who had any incentive to try train that bias out of it, we needed an artificial intelligence system that was trained with the right data and with the right developers. So in order to really understand the nuances of veganism and to be an ally for the vegan movement instead of something that's actively harming animals, we needed to train an AI on high quality data, and we also needed to make sure that it was trained by people who are aligned with vegan ethics. So with this in mind, we built VEG3 to leverage the full potential of AI to accelerate our transition to a vegan world. So the process for building this starts with gathering data, and this is the same for any type of artificial intelligence you're building. So we actually were in a great position to be able to gather a lot of this data because we had already for the previous year been working as a marketing agency for vegan businesses and animal rights charities, and we were really lucky to have a lot of our clients opt in to letting us use our data to train this model. So we actually had results there of what type of messaging was working, and we could see whether it was working or not based on things that we could actually track online, like the click-through rates, for example, how many comments, how many shares a post got, and even when it comes to products, how many actually resulted in sales. So we use this data to train VEG3 to optimize it for getting results for vegan businesses, animal charities, and animal activists. The next step was we tested VEG3 internally with our team of marketers, and finally we released VEG3. As we gained more users, we also gained more data, and that really accelerated the growth even further. So this is a continuous process that's still going on to this day, and this shows the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence too. It's not like traditional software where you just, write some code and that's it, the machine stops learning. VEG3 is actually constantly learning every time that it produces a content and every time that it sees the results of those content. So, what can VEG3 actually do? Well, the first thing it can do is it can chat with you in natural language. So we have a vegan marketing assistant, an activist that can answer any questions you have about veganism and will always respond in a way that's in line with the values of veganism and not displaying the sort of speciesism we see with things like ChatGPT. It can also write marketing copy, and it can even respond to anti-vegan comments automatically. We've also included a predictive analytics model. So basically any type of digital marketing, and I use this term very widely, it doesn't just apply to businesses, it could also apply to nonprofits posting on Facebook or anything like that. You can actually put in your caption and predict the reach before you post it. So you can then tweak that and try different variations of your captions, for example, before you post it, and you're going to see much more growth on your social media. And finally, the last thing that VEG3 can do is it has artificially generated summaries of more than 13,000 scientific studies that are all specifically related to advocating for veganism. So there's actually a lot of research that's been done in this area on things like, different psychological techniques, for example, in your messaging, what's more effective. So rather than having to guess about that, you can just enter a keyword, search through the database, and find those takeaways really quickly and easily without having to read through entire studies. But VEG3, we're not the only organization that's using AI to help animals. There's some other really great ones too. So one is Notco. This is the world's first AI vegan chef. So what this does is it looks at the molecular structure of animal proteins and it tries to replicate them as closely as possible with plants. So it can figure out combinations of different plants to combine that save money for vegan producers, for example, who actually make these products, and also taste better for the consumers, which therefore makes them more likely to switch over. So another really great organization was Biosim. They're creating simulations that see how drugs are going to basically impact your organs or bodies as a whole without having to run those tests on animals. And finally, there's an amazing nonprofit group called Vegan Hacktivists, and they put together the Animal Support Bot. So this uses artificial intelligence to automatically reply to non-vegan comments on Reddit. But as much as there's some really great work that's being done across these organizations and in this area of vegan AI, there's still three main unsolved problems that are really limiting its ability. And once we solve these problems, I think we're going to see a much bigger impact for animals. The first is that we haven't solved the problem of generalized intelligence. We have a lot of systems at the moment that are really good at specific tasks. For example, predicting how your social media post is going to go, creating a recipe for a vegan meat. But we don't have a generalized intelligence that can combine all of these different models into one model that can really perform well across everything. We also don't currently have actionable intelligence. So at the moment, these AI systems aren't taking actions on the user's behalf. They're basically giving predictions or ideas for copy and things like that. The final thing that's missing is personalized intelligence. So like I mentioned before, there are AI systems that can do things like, for example, look at your social media posts and predict personality, but we don't yet have that integrated into something that works with both the generalized intelligence and the actionable intelligence to be really powerful. So this is what VEG3 is planning to build next. We want to address all three of these issues by creating an artificial intelligence that can basically look at the individual person it's talking to, extract all of the data about them, then run that through its research library, for example, and make really powerful predictions about what's more likely to convince them or not. And so we're in the process at the moment of starting a crowdfunding campaign, and so that's what we are planning to do with that. So if you're interested in helping us get there faster to create a more powerful version of VEG3, if you're a vegan business owner, you can start a free 14-day trial at veg3.ai. Any animal activists or nonprofits, if you want to use VEG3, we do offer significant discounts. So send us an email at info@veg3.ai to request a charitable discount. If anyone here has any tech skills, like with software development or engineering, then send me your resume at sam@vegcatalyst.com. And if anyone is interested in investing or supporting our organization, you can email invest@vegcatalyst.com. So I'm going to open this up to questions now. Does anyone want to raise their hand if they have a question? I can bring you the mic.
Thought that way. And they wanna be, they wanna be like, to be what you have been spoken. They want to be like next generations over that. Not the old blokes like us.
Yeah, things changing fast, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, so what's your question?
And I was just wondering, like the question that you have been asking,
Yeah.
and like the about these next generations. And now, what do you mean about these next generations?
Yeah, sure. So let me see if I've got that question right. So in terms of like what's going to be the next generations with some of these models, I think that the reality is we have no idea at this stage. The thing is the technology is changing so quickly that it's kind of impossible to predict what's going to be coming in, 5 years even. But I think in terms of immediate next stages, the next thing that we can do is build a much more powerful version of this by connecting generalized and actionable intelligences. So does anyone else have any other questions?
For those of us who don't have the knowledge or money to support you directly in that way, what other ways can we support this going forwards?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of like generally with AI, I would recommend like looking at all the other tools that are available. For example, things like ChatGPT, and you can still leverage those to do things like fasten your content creation, but it's important to be aware of like the fact it does have these speciesist biases like we talked about. And in general, I think the more we can kind of get the word out about the power of these systems, the better. And also, like I mentioned before, like we do also do very significant discounts for individual animal activists and charities as well. Like our lowest price is $15 a month before the discount, so we can do, very kind of accessible plans as well. All right, any other questions?
Is there any issues with copywriting when you're using it as a business owner?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a legally untested area at the moment, so we can't really say for sure. What we can say though is that all of the data VG3 was trained on was opted-in data that businesses actually gave us permission to use, so we can guarantee with VG3 there's no issue about copywriting. However, with things like ChatGPT, it's an untested legal question. Basically, those organizations, the AI organizations themselves, basically say you have the right to use this, like it's your material. But we're seeing lawsuits, for example, with Stable Diffusion. Jetty Images is suing them for copyright, so we don't really know what the result of that will be yet.
So is that on?
Yeah.
So you were saying there's a way, like ChatGPT, it's quite speciesist, right? And that's definitely the case when you ask questions. But I have had times where, I don't know if the word program is right here, but if you're able to do a certain amount of prompts, it actually can you can persuade it to become less speciesist and give facts that aren't so. So I mean, like, is that a possibility for people that are just using ChatGPT? So how can they leverage that?
Yeah. Good question. So that's called prompt engineering, basically, and there's a lot that you can do with that. It's very important for like any kind of large language model to know about this. So one way you can do this is you start your prompt by telling it to act a certain way. So you can literally tell it, imagine that you are a vegan animal activist, you're trying to convince someone of this, you have a deep understanding of all of the research on effective communications, and so adding that into your prompt before you ask it to do anything will definitely have a huge impact on the output. Cool. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for your time. Cheers.